In our last video, we were talking about how research data collection for making business decisions is really not that old. And that in the early days, it was done by companies like AC Nielsen that provide full service research you can outsource. And then now we see more and more businesses doing it in-house. And with the use of AI, we can do more advanced modeling than maybe we had the expertise to do before. Maybe you're watching these videos because you are going to either be that third-party consultant or you are doing this in-house for your organization. So let's talk about options in terms of who does this research for your organization. You can do it completely internally. You can develop the research project, conduct it, analyze it, make recommendations to your organization. And perhaps that's why you're watching some of these videos, is so you can do it in-house. But you can also outsource all of it or part of it. And so if you're getting this training, then maybe it's because you are going to provide that work for others, or maybe you just simply need to know what's out there so you can hire other people to do pieces of it. So full service would be that particular organization like AC Nielsen would develop the research project. They would conduct the data analysis. They would conduct the data collection. They would perform the analysis, and they would provide a report to you of their findings and recommendations. We can break this down a bit more. Syndicated data services provide data that they sell to many people. So there are organizations that provide industry trends. As we look at that external environment, what is happening with the competition, what is happening with the economy, you might go to a syndicated data service to tell you about the overall industry. It's kind of hard to necessarily collect information that's about people that aren't your clients or your partners, and so you might go external for that. There are standardized services, so this is where the collection process is standardized. So this might be you then are purchasing a survey or a phone interview, and they kind of have a standard process for that data collection and what those surveys look like. You can have a customized service. So this can be hundreds of thousands of dollars in cost, where they are going to then build you a particular research process, a survey that is exactly what you need, the people you need, so very customized, but still doing all of the steps for you. Okay, so of course, the more customized, the more expensive this can get, whereas a syndicated data service is going to be cheaper because it's collected for multiple clients, so everyone in the industry might be buying into it, or so that would be the cheapest end. The customized would be the most expensive. There are also online research services, as we talked about in the previous video, like Google Data Analytics will collect information so you can subscribe to them. And then they will track your website, number of clicks, who is connecting from what type of device. So looking at the IP address and the information that's collected from that. And so you can basically pay these third parties to provide you information. Those are full service. Okay, they will do the data design or the research design, the data collection, the analysis, and provide you a summary of their findings. On the other side is the more limited service. This is where you say, okay, you know what? I'm good at one thing, but not necessarily at something else. And so I'm going to outsource just a part of the research. So this might be outsourcing the field work. All right, you don't have a lot of people in your organization. You have designed the questions. You know who that target market is, but you're going to hire a third party to go and knock on doors or call your customers to collect the data. So we're simply outsourcing the collection of the data if we're doing field service. We have market segment specialists. These are going to provide us research on potential target markets. So perhaps you have seen that you can buy with SurveyMonkey, for example, a group to respond to your survey, right? You can buy a list. That's a market segment specialist. We would then purchase a list of people who have certain characteristics that we think are similar to our clients or whoever we want to get the information from. Sample design and distribution services, they can help as well in terms of that color list. So we can buy the sample itself, sample design. The market segment specialist would help you figure out who that group is to start with. Okay. There are more specialized research techniques. So for example, if you're a grocery, you want to compare prices at different grocery stores. Maybe you want to show, how you are in terms of cost versus the competitors. You can hire mystery shoppers to go and buy a certain list of items from different stores. We can also outsource the data analysis itself. So maybe you've designed the survey, you have collected the information, but you don't know any stats. You could hire someone to analyze and interpret the results. So you can outsource any of the parts of a research project, or you can hire companies to do it entirely, or you can do it yourself, whether you are the third party that they're hiring or whether you're working for an organization. So we're going to show you how to do all those pieces as we go through these different videos. Now, we've looked at how you can choose the different roles you're going to play, but it's also important that we recognize when we should just not do research. Right? There's an appropriate time to do research and appropriate time to just not do research. The first is that the resources, so see if I can get this to right, resources are lacking. So if you cannot afford, whether you're hiring external or whether you're doing it yourself, if you can't afford a big enough sample size, so enough people to participate in your research for you to actually make solid recommendations, then you shouldn't conduct the research at all. Okay, so if all you're going to be able to do is collect information from a small handful of people, which may or may not represent the group that you really need to know about, it's really not worth your time and effort. We want to make sure we have sufficient sample size in order to make decisions. And we're going to be talking in later videos about how do we determine what that sufficient sample size is. The other thing we need to consider is what if the results are not helpful? Okay. So our research, we want research that is going to lead to actions. We want to collect information that helps us inform decisions. So let's suppose we did a research project. We find that poor self-esteem, people with poor self-esteem use our finance company, right? What do we do with that? So we need to make sure the questions we're asking, the information we're collecting is something we can actually do something with, right? So we'll often ask things about like people's geographic location or their income level or the activities they do besides using our service so that we can gear our advertisements, our wording, and our promotions, our pricing to what they would need. But if you find out information like, well, people with poor self-esteem use our product, is that something we can actually do something with? If it is, if you can partner with another organization that would have a similar client base, then great, we can make action based on it. But if it is information that's great, nice to know, but doesn't actually give us anything to actually do something with, then we shouldn't bother with the research. The other question is, has the opportunity passed? So if the product is mature or declining, if there's new technology, then pursuing research to figure out a better way to sell the product is really not helpful. So if you're HP Touchpad and you are selling a product that is antiquated, expensive, you can't keep up with the competition, then doing research to find a way to better way to sell it and promote it is not a good use of your money. The product it needs to be sunsetted. You need to move to something else. Now, if the research is related to how you could change the product, right? More apps, what kind of apps to make it viable, then it's worth the research. But if we're looking at, well, how do we promote and price a Blu-ray player? Well, the product is mature, it's declining. Who's really buying a Blu-ray player anymore? That's really not a good use of money. The opportunity for research related to this product has passed. All right, the next one here is a decision has been made. Research is to inform decisions. What should you be doing? If you have already made a decision, doing research to help you feel better about the decision is a waste of money. Okay? Research should be helping you decide. As we go back, I'm just going to scroll way back here. Here's my programmatic. It's either going to help us develop options, test those alternatives, or assess whether or not it was effective. If you've already committed and invested all the time and money, so you've already made the decision and committed to it, and you're not going to be changing your mind, you don't need research. Research is about developing options, testing those options, and assessing the one that you chose. If you're committed to it, the money is already sunk, then it isn't worth conducting the research. Okay. Now, the next one here is you should not conduct research if your management cannot agree on what they need to know. To make a decision. One of the things we're going to look at in an upcoming video is converting our problem challenge we have for our organization into a research project, turning it into a research problem. But if your leadership can't agree on what information they would need to make a decision, we really can't even start the research project, because the research project is about defining what information we need, what is the decision we're trying to make, and then collecting that data, analyzing it so that you have that information to make those decisions. If they can't agree on what the problem is, on what information they need, then you're going to spend a lot of money creating research projects that give you information that is not going to be helpful, right? Results are not helpful. And then it's going to lead to no decision at all. One of the risks of research, if you are hosting a survey or a focus group, is that people participate expecting it to lead to decisions or change. So for example, I want to find out how to get my employees more engaged within my organization. So I host these town halls, I have focus groups, I ask for their feedback. If I ask for their feedback and then do nothing, they will be very unhappy and they will never participate in any of my research again. So they are expecting to see movement based on the results or the findings of that research. So you need your management, whoever is going to be the decision-making authority, to agree on what is the issue and what do they need to know to make decisions. We have two left here. If the info already exists, so you can make the decision, then you don't need to do research. Don't pay the money if the information you need is already there. Okay, so if the decision-making information already exists, oh my goodness, it's so hard to read, then it is not worth doing the research. And then we also need to perform a cost-benefit analysis. So if the costs outweigh the benefits, then it's not worth doing. So what is the cost to do this research, whether it's in-house or we're hiring external for part of it or all of it? versus the benefit it's going to create. So we need to look at, is it worth the money? So we look at the return on investment. So any type of research for your organization is an investment for the company. We're trying to help make decisions. We're trying to project what's going to happen in the future. And so we have to consider the ROI, the return on investment. So it's important to be able to estimate that return on investment prior to doing the research. So the key here is that we need to be able to estimate that return prior to entering into our research project. A return on investment takes the dollar value. What is the value of the research that we're going, the results? What is the value? So if we're trying to decide, for example, about offering this new product, what do we think is going to be the sales for that product, the profitability, times the increased confidence is going to create, times the increased likelihood we're going to act. So what this tells us is that if that product is not going to be profitable, there's not going to be a return on this research. If it's not going to make us more confident about our decision, it's not worth doing the research. If it's not going to change what we do, so it's not going to increase the likelihood of action, then we shouldn't do this research. So it has to increase the likelihood of action. It has to increase our confidence in our decision, and it has to lead to an outcome that is profitable. We compare that to the cost of the research itself. Okay, that gets us our return on investment. And we can break this down a little bit. Here's profit margin for your company. Here's your market size. So how big is your company? So let's say you are a small company and you have a very small profit margin. Okay, so when you think about the markup in terms of cost versus the price you sell it for, if there's very little difference between that, and you are a small company, you're not doing big scale marketing research. You're doing things that are free in-house in terms of that collection. Now, what we do see is that with AI and machine learning, and if you have that expertise in-house, then those small companies with small profit margins can do some things. But remember, if you are taking an employee and having them do this data collection and analysis and not other things, that's time that they could have been doing something else. And so it is more risky. If you have a large profit margin, so the difference between your cost and the price you sell it for is much larger, but you are a small company, you might consider secondary data analysis. This is where you are looking at existing data that someone else collected for a different purpose. This could either be your company collected it, so this is going to be your record, your sales records, or this could be that industry data. You could go that route if you're a small company, but you have a bit more wiggle room in terms of that difference between the cost and the price you're selling it for. So you have a bit of profit to play with in terms of this expense. If you are a large company with a small profit margin, then you are likely also doing that secondary data analysis. You are using information that was collected for another purpose because you don't have a whole lot of profit to play with here, but you are a larger company, then you might be doing that secondary data. It historically has been the large companies with a larger profit margin, think Apple, doing the marketing research. Okay, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. They're the ones historically who have done the marketing research. So this grid here, it really is more historic. As we get into more automation, AI, machine learning, and we get that expertise into the hands of you, those who work for the businesses that may not have large profit margins and large market share, then more of these marketing research methods become accessible. But even then, we still need to come back to the ROI. Does it increase the likelihood of action? Does it increase your confidence? does it look at a decision that would bring in money for your organization? So before we leave this, let's just look here at an example. So let's suppose that the cost of your research is $1 million. Okay, the cost of action is 20 million. Our revenue is 50. And we think we can gain then, right? If the revenue we're bringing in is 50 and the action itself costs 20, then what we would gain would be 30 million from this. So if we're comparing the cost being $1 million to the gain from it of 30 million, right? Then we would think, okay, well, that sounds like it's worth doing. So we take 30 million, that's going to be from our formula. That value is at 30 million, so that's the gain, revenue minus the cost of action. And the cost of the research itself is 1 million. We need to then consider what is the change in confidence and what is the change in the likelihood of action. So suppose that we're currently 10% confident about making the right decision. We think with the additional data, we will be 70% confident, in which case the gain in confidence here is going to be 60%. And let's suppose that the probability that we're going to act with no research at all is 50%. The probability we're going to act once we have the research data is 80%. So the change in the probability we act once we have this extra data to support it, we think will be about 30%. Okay. So what is the ROI here? Well, we would take our 30 times 60% times 30% divided by 1 million. What we end up with is 540%. Ah, crap. Okay, what does that mean? That means that $1 has a return on investment of $5.40. So in this case, because there is a gain from the action, right? It would cost us 20 million, the revenue would be 50, so we would gain 30. It actually changes our confidence by 60%. It actually changes our likelihood of action by 30%. And the cost of the activity is less than the gain. Then what we see here is that the return on investment for every dollar we spend will get us $5.40. So we have a positive return on investment. So in this case, we would be likely to enter into the research project. There are some problems with using ROI though. ROI divides the profit return by the expenditures instead of subtracting it. ROI was invented to compare one-time investments based on projected returns, whereas in marketing research, in research projects, we're going to have a stream of costs, not a one-time cost. ROI assumes diminishing returns over time, and it focuses on the short term. So it's not going to take into consideration the impact on your brand, long-term development of your organization. It is very short-term in terms of what is the cash flow that comes in, what is the change in your confidence and your ability to action, as opposed to any longer-term returns like creating brand recognition and opening up future markets for that would have a financial return but not happen for a while. It is very short term. ROI was actually created to compare alternative expenditures. So do we do this activity or another activity, as opposed to do something or not do something. It was to compare options A or B. So ROI itself was made for finance, not really for marketing. And so it does create some issues, but it's a way to think about whether or not it's worth doing the research itself. Before we leave this topic about is research something you should do, let's just do one more slide here. So is research always right? So let's just assume we have a return on investment and that if we look at our list here, our resources are not lacking, the results would be helpful, the opportunity has not passed, a decision has not yet been made, management agrees on what they need to know in order to make decisions, the information doesn't already exist, and we say the benefits outweigh the costs. Again, we have a positive ROI. Well, it's important to recognize that the accuracy of the research is very important, and it is also difficult for respondents, participants in our surveys to imagine a product or service that does not yet exist. And so there's no guarantee that the research that we do is going to lead to the right answers. Okay, so for example, in 1982, marketing researchers told Beecham Products that their cold water detergent Delicare would be a success. So back in 1982, the researchers said that this would be great. People would buy it. Well, no one bought it. In 1987, Beecham sued marketing researchers for $24 million because no one bought their product. So when we do research, it is very important that you write out every assumption that you make. Here are the constraints, here are the limitations, here are the things that we considered. Because if reality does not fit into those assumptions, things are different than that constraints that you think, then you don't want to be liable if you are wrong. Okay. Now, what's interesting is when it comes to cold water detergent, now in the 2020s, right, we have lots of cold water detergent. And the key here is that most of the cleaning agents, people want to advertise that it is effective in cold water. So this particular product was just ahead of its time. The external environment hadn't quite gotten there yet. And so we need to recognize that when we do research, especially if you're the company or the consultant being hired, you got to be very clear as to what are the expectations, what are the assumptions, what was considered and what was not considered, what was scope within the project. And then the assumption is that if you're making a forecast for the future, is that these conditions that we're assuming hold actually in the future. The accuracy of research is very important. And so we do have to assess how accurate are our models and choose models that are appropriate. The show Seinfeld, it was predicted by researchers to be a failure. But then we know, right, that's still on TV today, and it is quite popular. Seinfeld, because the researchers said it would not be popular, that it would be a failure, it was actually stuck on the shelf for about 6 months. And then when they later reevaluated the recommendations, what they found is problems with the way the focus groups were conducted. So they found the participants in the focus groups did not reflect the breadth of the TV audience. So again, assumptions. We're assuming that the groups who are participating in our research project match the group, the one we want information from. So for example, if we were to create focus groups and we only invited our family members, our friends, our mothers, our brothers, the challenge with that type of focus group is that group, they all have a relationship, and so they all have the same ideas, right? So if you have a group that is related, interacts with each other, they're all going to tend to kind of think the same way, and that's kind of why they're friends, because they think the same way or they were raised similarly. What we want to make sure is that if we're doing research, like a focus group or a survey, that it actually represents the variety that exists in the group that we're trying to represent, so that we get different perspectives, different opinions, different views. And so your research isn't always going to be right. We look at what is the best method given what we have, what are the assumptions we have made in this, and would be very clear to whoever's hiring you, or if you're doing this in-house, so that you are not ultimately liable if the results are not the same as what you are projecting.